Judd McVee is now a Fremantle player. And is this one of those trades that go down in the AFL period that AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach just go, I don't care. More Sam Flanders trades, please. Or is there a little bit more to this than what meets the eye? We're going to talk about what this move means for the club he's left, where he's landed at, and all the variables around the Judd McVee trade from an AFL Fantasy and a SuperCoach perspective. But on him specifically, look, from a fantasy prospect, ain't much there at the Demons, to be fair. Just the 2 career SuperCoach tons ever, a top score this year in SuperCoach of 91, no AFL Fantasy tons at all, and a mid-50s average across the formats. That's a pretty good durability over the handful of AFL seasons that he's had, but has never really kicked on the way that I think both Melbourne fans, and certainly from a fantasy community, had thought, because there was high hopes for him. Like at the junior levels, we see this elite rebounding traits that could come from him. He's really clean user of the ball, deceptively strong, always likes to take some part of the game on. It just never really was consistent. There'd be moments, there'd be spurts, there'd be quarters, there'd be even a fortnight or two. And then just didn't really land ultimately yet at this point of his AFL career to live up to the potential, or at the very least the expectation about what his potential could be. What does this mean for the club that he's left? Honestly, this is the one that I think stings out of any other movement that the club has either committed to by either kind of encouraging that player to seek a trade, like a Stephen May or a Clayton Oliver, or even to a Christian Petrarca who's opting out, and it's mutual, but it's publicly being stated more as Christian wants out rather than the other 2 narratives. Spargo out already as a small forward. The others are at least in train at the time of this episode recording, and probably most likely landing as well. But this is the one that hurts because he sits in the age and the list profile that I'm pretty sure Stephen King is really desperate to keep. Like a 22-year-old who's shown he can play both the offensive and defensive components of that halfback role. And while the club only flirted with it in moments, especially in the back of 2024, there's moments where you're like, well, I see a little bit of midfield showing here that's not too bad. So I think it's fascinating to me that he was floating around a little bit, and under a new coach, it's always hard to know exactly how it might have played out. We'll never truly know. But the ball movement at Melbourne for a number of years now has felt very stop-starty, and part of that's due to the midfield mix, and the other is they've never really found a weapon across half-back that can generate that playmaking. There was a period of time where it was all through a Christian Salem. Then the hope was a Trent Rivers could be that, and talk about a guy kind of flip-flop, back and forward, half-back, inside mid wing, half-back. We wait to see exactly how they structure it. Does Salem become the general back there? Do they give Rivers that more opportunity? Do they want him to lead this new midfield brigade? Does Windsor, who was experimented across half-back over the front half of last year, does he become the run and carry player? Or is a more accumulator type developing his midfield craft, and are they going to send a Xavier Lindsay back, who spent a little bit of time over the first few weeks of the 25 season there? It's fascinating to me to see how Melbourne are going to reinvigorate not only their list, but their game style and their ball movement. And so McVee out just creates another option for how Stephen King wants to set this team up. There doesn't feel like anything obvious. It is absolutely going to be something for us to keep an eye on and go, right, if all these players that have been rumoured to depart of Oliver, Petrarca and May all go alongside the already departed Spargo and McVee, it opens up a world of dynamic difference. So to be really confident here for you on this episode, he's out, this is going to mean A, B, C, D. I'd be forecasting at best. And if I was to do that, I would say this. McVee out was probably going to be more of a halfback playmaker. And so I think it just creates the opportunity for a Salem. And my personal hope would be a Xavier Lindsay takes that opportunity. I think he's got the temperament and the skill set to be able to offer something different that they've drastically needed back there. What does it mean for the club he's landed at? Well, he's not getting that flirty midfield role between the combination of Young, Sarong, Brayshaw. You've got the float in and out options that can come through there with a Shai Bolton, for example, as even just the fourth option, let alone a Johnson, Erasmus. My goodness me, they're stacked. O'Driscoll could even pop in there if they needed it. They are fine in that midfield. What they do need is a little bit of a new dimension inside this defensive line. And I think that's where we're going to see him play as one of their real central figures in this defensive 6 and 7 unit. That's where I've got him sitting there. Yeah, I just realized I did the 6 and 7 thing. What have I become? Anyway, I think he's actually going to become a really critical piece for not only for Fremantle, but also what it means for us in the fantasy footy circles in 2026. Because so much of Fremantle's ball movement has been a 1 wood and 2 wood option between a Jordan Clark and a Luke Ryan. And Luke started to slow a little bit more this year. He's a very different type of ball magnet and player. Frankly, Fremantle look better with a little bit more pace on the ball, a little bit more speed of movement, whereas Luke is a little bit more of a slower controlled type ball movement player. That's how he had those monster AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach seasons where he was getting kick-ins, getting intercepts, getting the transition from flank to flank kick marks. That's where he scored so well. But when they took that off him a little bit this year and started giving others that option, Fremantle look better with pace on the ball when they're attacking the game. They look so much better. But teams could just prevent a Jordan Clark as really the only creator off half back when they could limit his run, limit his scoring and kicking efficiency. They'd really stagnate up that Fremantle ball movement. The arrival of Judd into this team, I think, is not only going to create another avenue and dimension out of defensive 50, I actually think it could just be the thing that frees up Jordan Clark to move from a nice sort of top 15 defensive premium option for us, where he could kind of pick up another 5, 6, 7 points per game a week with a few variables going his way. Because Judd adds some defensive stuff that's been a little bit lacking, adds a little bit more skill and polish around ball movement and some speed on the ball that, again, I think they've been lacking. I think this is an awesome addition for Fremantle and is not getting enough love in the football media for how important this could be, because it now plays an additional supportive role that I only think will help a Jordan Clark. I can see these two creators off half back creating some real damaging ball movement. And that's not a bad thing for Jordan, because it's no longer only through him that any speed of ball comes through. He's not just the one that teams lock out. He becomes another avenue of support. So I think it does hurt any chance of Luke Ryan becoming fantasy relevant. Again, I think this is probably the nail in that coffin now that it's Jordan Clark and Judd are going to get that ball movement going. And Luke, yep, you'll get opportunities to do kick-ins. Yep, we need you to intercept, but we really need you to limit and restrict opposition teams when the ball's in D50, not to create score movements and defensive rebounds for us. So that's a big change. So I'd be scrubbing Luke Ryan off. But I think there's a world where this gives a little bit of a scoring bump to Jordan Clark. So I've always been interested in it, of Jordan Clark's fantasy power. I just think it might go up a little bit. And we've seen at GWS with Lockie Whitfield, Lockie Ash. Now, I'm not saying these two Dockers are anywhere near the same style or type or scoring system that the Giants are in, but rather showing that the market share and the way a team can set up and create ball movement out of D50, it absolutely doesn't come at the cost of one eating another person's scoring. There is a way that it can exist together. And I do think, while maybe not at the same scoring level for both, I think it does elevate and support and almost create and feed into each other. That's how positive I am about this move. So I think this is an awesome benefit for a Jordan Clark. I'd absolutely be moving him up the relevancy roster for you. While it might not feel immediate, it is absolutely there. If what I can see coming down the line, I think this could be pretty powerful. And I probably wouldn't be opposed to throwing, a late, maybe my last or second or third last pick in a draft on the keeper platform, where we choose to draft in 2026 and have in 2025, I could see him being someone that's like, you know what, it's worth it because the upside is, he's really only been this sort of 50s and 60s guy for the better part of his fantasy and supercoach career. But I could just see enough things changing at Fremantle with, again, their ball movement, their play style, that could see him jump into the 70s and, gosh, maybe even high 70s if a few variances go his way, let alone the benefit that comes to a Jordan Clark. So to me, this move doesn't feel fantasy relevant specifically around Judd. But I think it's now him coming in creates greater stability and a greater outlet and another avenue of scoring that Jordan Clark can feed off, while also creates a big hole, along with a lot of other moves at Melbourne, to be fair, a big hole that could create some fantasy movement. So these two things are going to be big watches in the off and the preseason, because I think we could get some real value for money for us, both in draft capital and in how we spend our salary cap in Classic. That's my thoughts on Judd McVee. What do you think? Is this important addition for the Dockers? Is it a bit of a nothing move? How do you think the Melbourne Football Club are going to cover his departure, let alone everything else? I'd love to know in the comments below, if you're watching this on YouTube, who do you think is going to be the creator and the playmaker off halfback that could pop for us in fantasy footy in 2026? I'd love to know in the comments of this video. If you're loving this series, whether it's on YouTube or on your audio podcast feed, please make sure you followed the channel, subscribed, given it those stars and the likes that you need to. We so greatly appreciate your support. And every single time a player moves clubs, this trade and free agency period, we will review them and tell you what it means for the club they've left, the club they've landed at, and how it's all going to impact potentially in fantasy footy for 2026. We'll be back with you again soon with another player that's moved clubs and our thoughts about them real soon.